The main and most difficult situation right now is in the south of Donetsk, the northwestern part of Donetsk region. This is the Kramatorsk-Slavyansk direction, particularly from the side of Pokrovsk and from the side of Konstantinovka. Towards Grishino, towards Rodinskoye, the Russians are increasing the pressure. Well, the main objective is to reach Dobropilya. So far, they are unable to achieve this. But the trend is clear. Konstantinovka, fierce, heavy fighting, urban combat in the city, but according to some reports, please note this, analysts say that the enemy occupies 90. The enemy is present in 90% of Konstantinovka, while the defense forces are noted in 70% of the city's territory. So if anyone says that the Russians have captured Konstantinovka or that our defense forces fully control Konstantinovka, that's not entirely accurate. In fact, what's happening in the city, this analogy has been used before, is like a vinaigrette, where the positions of both the defense forces and the occupying forces are mixed together. There is no rear, no flanks, no front line. So, as we can see, the intense fighting is currently happening at the tactical level. It is very complex and incredibly important for the overall strategy. Because the city of Konstantinovka effectively covers the vital direction toward Drushki for us. Therefore, holding on to Konstantinovka is absolutely crucial for our defense in this region. As long as the strategic stronghold of Konstantinovka continues to hold out against the ongoing pressure, the enemy forces remain completely unable to make any significant advance toward the critical Drushkivka direction. To the north, things are very heated for us, not just in Regorodok, but in that whole area. There are also active attempts by the enemy to advance further south. Another direction, there are attempts to break through the defensive line. On the Lyman axis, the defense forces are holding firm in extremely heavy fighting. If anyone is following the map there, it might seem like there aren't any significant changes, but in reality, there is very intense fighting going on. In the south, there are clashes on the Alexandrovsk direction. Counterattacks by the defense forces are forcing the Russians to pull their troops back to the north of Hulyaypol, and apparently from Orikiv as well. When looking at the broader picture, along with the undeniable fact that the unmanned aerial vehicle units are not only actively conducting precision offensive strikes, but they are also successfully implementing that very comprehensive and strategic logistical lockdown for the entire Russian troop grouping stationed in the south. Here, the Russian successes are significantly more modest, and you could say the trend is turning in favor of Ukraine's defense forces.
Pavel, we understand that communication is a very important aspect of war, and disconnecting Starlink for the Russians played a very significant role at the time. But they are trying to implement their own developments and even boast that they supposedly have some successes. How much is this felt in the dynamics at the front?
At the moment, it is felt only slightly. Everything depends on the satellite constellation. So far, the constellation, they've managed to launch about 12.5 satellites that are already operational, allows them to provide communication somewhere along the front line over Ukrainian territory for a window of about an hour to an hour and a half per day. If they decide to double that amount, that will again significantly expand the available time by a full additional hour, at the very least. But looking at it from this perspective, if they actually use this technology to control those very same Shahed drones and other similar systems, it essentially means they have a significant new window of opportunity for attacks that opens up for them during the daylight hours. These are, of course, somewhat limited opportunities, but nevertheless, it represents a critical period when the Russians can actively control their same jet-powered Shaheds, and indeed all their Shaheds, in complete real time. It's a small window, but it's already a window. If this window expands, it will be a serious challenge. And everything depends on how many satellites and in what time frame they can launch from Plesetsk to form this pseudo-Starlink.
In the Leningrad region of Russia, according to preliminary information, a warehouse belonging to the company Wildberries has caught fire. Local authorities are reporting a drone attack and confirmed damage in the warehouse area. Russians are posting videos of the fire in Krasny Bor on social media. This is in the Leningrad region. Another fire has been recorded in the city of Chekhov. This is in the Moscow region. We are awaiting official information from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Well, here is a video from the internet that we can already show you. Pavel, the successful long-range strikes continue in important strategic regions of the Russian Federation, Leningrad and Moscow regions. Do you think these strikes will continue? And what is the ultimate goal? Should the company Wildberries disappear altogether, become a thing of the past?
Well, this kind of analysis should be done by an economic analyst because, as far as I know, you don't need to completely 100% destroy a company for it to leave the market, right? In today's volatile economic conditions, well, experiencing losses of about 20, 30, or sometimes even 40% can easily lead to the total collapse of a given business. Right now, at this very moment, approximately 20% of all of Wildberry's operational capacities have been completely destroyed. And most likely it will continue to collapse, especially since, even when trying to somehow diversify its operations. But my forecast for it is not optimistic. Another issue is that the strikes on the logistics warehouses, should not divert the forces and resources that are aimed at destroying the Russian oil industry. Here too, consistency and systematic strikes are important. The Russians are trying to adapt, to adjust their industry, to withstand the constant attacks from Ukrainian drones. Now we see on the one hand that some of the oil refining capacities that were hit have been restored by the Russians. Some, in theory, cannot be restored, and some are still in the process of being repaired. Therefore, as soon as Russian enterprises finish restoring their ability to process oil into gasoline, they should be hit again, repeating the cycle over and over.
We have all clearly seen that Wildberries offers its potential customers not only frying pans and socks, but also body armor and drones. You could probably even buy fiber optics and scopes there as well. So we understand that this is a hub that helps the Russian Federation's army, and these strikes essentially destroy and reduce the opportunities for Putin's army to try to develop in any way. At the same time, voluntary enlistment in Russia has practically stopped, so the authorities are involving law enforcement to forcibly send men to the front. To do this, they use beatings and fabricate criminal cases. The Wall Street Journal reports this. Military recruiters, together with the police, detain citizens right on the streets near their workplaces or under the pretext of a routine document check. After that, the men are taken to enlistment offices where they are forced to sign a contract. As analysts note, such cases are the result of the Russian authorities no longer being able to attract the required number of people, even with high payments. In addition, in the regions of the Russian Federation, payments are being introduced for civilians who bring in, so to speak, a volunteer. On average, the reward for such recruiting reaches 100,000 rubles, which is almost $1,500, it should be noted. And what can we say not only about the methods, but also about the quality of those soldiers they are trying to gather and send to the front? What is the quality of the Russian Federation's army today, considering that the full-scale war began in 2022 and they have already lost more than 1.5 million?
Well, there's no point in comparing it to 2022 because 2022 was the year the Russian regular army was defeated. Then, in September 2022, the Russian leadership decided to pull itself out of this pit to fix it through mass mobilization. And we saw, just remember those so-called mobics or mobilized personnel, when the mobilization machine simply struggled. and eventually choked under the massive, overwhelming flood, the flood of freshly and hastily conscripted, let's say, people who urgently needed to be properly trained and transformed into capable soldiers. Now the Russian mobilization machine has reached a mode of about 30 to 35,000. That's its average capacity. If the number of recruits is increased, the machine will function worse, and the quality of the human potential at the output will be significantly lower. So, when people talk about a possible mass mobilization in the Russian Federation, well, it's problematic not only from a political and social standpoint, but also from the perspective of organizational management, managing the mobilization itself. A sudden and very sharp increase in numbers will inevitably result in a significant decline in the overall standard and effectiveness of individual servicemen and units, and consequently, and as a direct result, the Russian army as a whole. At the same time, they still need to implement something because, as a result of the tactics, or I would even say the strategy, of the defense forces aimed at depleting enemy personnel, that so-called former defense minister Fedorov's plan of minus 50,000 Russian invaders per month, which both the drone forces and other defense forces are striving for, it forces them either to shrink and render their units and formations unfit and incapable of combat, or to increase the pace of mobilization, thereby lowering the quality of the conscript pool.